I'm Bob. I'm an addict. I want to thank you. I want to thank the Piedmont area and the Camp Out Committee for taking a chance on me. I know some of you, but as addicts, I know all of you. And I'm really thrilled to have had a chance to talk with your speaker for tomorrow night. And we kind of had a few laughs about days gone by. It's true, I spoke recently at the 1995 Virginia Convention in Charlottesville. Those of you that may have had the privilege of being there remember we had an ice storm that night, and the hotel was rather crowded, and they opened all the hallways and put speakers in the hallways, and there was a party going on. And I had the privilege of being a part of that. You know, it does sadden me a little bit to come here and think about Philip. Those of you that knew Philip, he sponsored some of you. And Philip passed away, way too soon from undetectable medical conditions. And I miss Philip every day. The people that touch our lives, and our lives are never the same when they're gone. However, we know from our spiritual connection with a higher power that they're always here with us. The past couple of years have been very difficult for older members in Narcotics Anonymous because we're starting to lose our members. My wife lost her sponsor, Sydney, and some of you knew Sydney. And she was clean for 30 years, and she was 80 years old. She got clean when she was 50. Last year, I lost my sponsor, Bobby, and Bobby had 35 years clean, and he was about as notorious and ornery as they come. And, I think there is a loving God when we have the opportunity to converse and see these people before they pass. I was very fortunate. I saw Bobby a couple of hours before he passed away in Las Vegas, Nevada, in the hospital. And it's just a miracle that I was there and I was able to hold his hand before he passed away. And the love never diminishes. A year ago, I was going to work one morning down the interstate and I felt a little bit woozy, so I thought I would pull over and catch a breath, and instead I caught a tree, and I hit a tree at about 70 miles an hour, and I broke all my ribs on one side and smashed my face and had a number of stitches in the top of my head and died 3 times on the table, and for some reason I'm still here. My face is still a little bit numb from all the operations I've had to reconstruct this mug. I'm the only person I know that had a facelift and I look older than I did before. I think it's some kind of joke or something. That's why I love my wife. She tells me I'm still beautiful, so that's a good thing. My wife and I have been together for 23 years. So relationships work in recovery, but you can't work the relationship. You got to work the steps. Okay? Because if you keep doing what we used to do and that's working the relationship, they go away. I've only been married 3 times, so I'm a novice at it. I know others that have been married many more times. I think, three times is lucky because we do pretty good. Speaking of health issues, I want to get this out and get it over with quickly because I really don't want to dwell on it. I got hepatitis C diagnosis many years ago. I've probably had it for the last 40 years. And it's only in the past couple of years that it started really showing up in my blood work when I go to the doctors. So I've been getting tested every 6 months with a ultrasound and blood work to see if it's getting any worse. And the test that I had last week showed a shadow on my liver. So I had a CAT scan done and it came back with very strong possibility I have liver cancer. And life goes on, I'm powerless over things like that. I just know that because I've been diligent in going to the doctor 6 months ago, I wasn't there. So it's just starting. And we're hoping that we caught it early. And next week, I got to go to the University of Florida and have some tests done. And, I have the spiritual strength and the faith that a loving God is going to take care of me. And it's harder for me to accept the attention people give me because of this than it is having this. See, I'm a giver, not a taker. You know, I worry about who's going to take care of my wife if something happens to me. Who's going to take care of the people I sponsor if something happens to me? I don't worry about woe is me and all that stuff. I mean, if anything, I'll go up there and probably be the speaker on Saturday night with Bobby and Sydney and Philip and everybody else. So, maybe I win. Maybe this is a winning situation. But in any event, I'm really glad to be here this weekend. It gives me a chance to get out of myself and get away and obviously talk about the thing I love most, and that's recovery and Narcotics Anonymous. See, I think that as an addict, and it's the only place I come, we're different than other people, I mean, if you want to know how different we are, just go stand by the coffee pot. You watch a person from another fellowship take some sugar bags and shake them and pour the sugar in their coffee, and you watch addicts and they go up and they give it a little tap, So starting out at the coffee pot, we're a little bit different. We have a certain way of doing things, We want to see if the bag is short or not, So that kind of like puts us in the right place at the right time. Bob and I were talking about the early days of Narcotics Anonymous when some of the literature got changed and there was people that really got irate about it to the point where they would not come to Narcotics Anonymous because they didn't think we had any recovery here, And quite frankly, I go to some meetings and I, to this day, have to kind of agree with them. I mean, I have pet peeves. And my pet peeves, number one, is when I got clean, our literature was sacred. When we did the readings before a meeting, you could hear a pin drop. Now people chime in with their own words and everything is cool and hip and funny. It ain't funny, man, when you come here and you ain't got no more places to go. You've already been to the psychiatrist too many times. You've been on methadone too many times. You've been in the hospital too many times. You've been to church too many times. Plus, I got saved about 10 times, None of that stuff works for dope fiends, see? And when I got clean, if you weren't a dope fiend, I really didn't want to talk to you. See, I thought the only true addicts was the guy that was a hype, that stole your shit and then helped you look for it, To me, that made a lot of sense, Somebody took your stuff, I'll help you look for it, So it's very difficult for me sometimes to listen to people chime in and add words to our readings when really I believe they should be listened to. I mean, think about the newcomer. I mean, really think about if you were new and you walked into a meeting and some of the things that people do in meetings, would you come back? If you were a professional person at an open meeting deciding whether to send your clients, be it a prosecutor or a judge, do you want to send your people to NA or to jail? You'd probably think jail is more sane because we do some crazy stuff in our meetings and we got to stop doing that. That's my pet peeve and that's my soapbox for a minute. But I really believe that this fellowship, will survive, because it's based in spiritual principles. We don't always follow them, The person standing up here, I'm not perfect. I do a lot of things wrong, but I do a few things right also. And somebody told me when I was new, if you stay clean and you trust in God and you help another addict, then you're going in the right direction. And I believe that. I believe that the greatest thing we can do as members of this beautiful fellowship is to help the addict that walks in the door feel welcome and hope they come back. Bob and I were talking about the days when people used to go to the bathroom and someone would go with them to make sure they didn't go in there to use. When I got clean, if they knew where you lived and you didn't show up for a meeting, we came to your house to find out why. And I've gone to people's houses and found them dead at their kitchen table with a spike in their arm. So it wasn't pretty back then. There was nobody that wanted to mess with addicts. You couldn't even get into a hospital unless you were dead drunk. People used to come to my apartment. Karen and I had an apartment with 3 bedrooms, the 2 of us. And we would take addicts in and we would feed them brandy or whatever they could keep down if they were hype. So they got drunk enough so we could take them to the emergency room and they would admit them. And once the hospital had them, they had to treat them. But we had to get them in the door first. And there was no place for us to go. When I got clean in the state of Connecticut in 1984, we were part of the Mid-Atlantic region until just before I got clean. The Mid-Atlantic region went all the way from Maryland to Maine and from Pennsylvania to Rhode Island. It was a big region. And Connecticut became its own region. And we had 4 areas. And I had the privilege of being part of the start of the service structure in Connecticut. And of course, as a hype, an ex-convict, you know where my service began, and that was in H&I. And I've been a proud member of H&I ever since. I still take a meeting into the county jail the last Tuesday of the month in Daytona Beach. I don't do it because I've got something important to say to these people. I do it to remind myself where I come from. Because I believe in my heart, if we forget where we come from, we haven't, ended our run yet. And I don't want to go back out there. Because I know from watching other people do that very few make it back. See, I believe recovery is a gift from our higher power. It's a beautiful gift. And we need to, savor that. We need to hold on to it because we might not get it again. I know people with 20 years plus that go out and use and die. Very few come back. And I know when people are new, I tell them, look around the room because most of the people here won't be here next year. It's the dichotomy of addicts. We know a good thing when we see one, we just can't stay there. We got to keep moving for some reason. My story is not a whole lot different than anybody else's. I found ways to use more and used until I couldn't use anymore. And the day that I stopped using, if I could have used one more time, I would have used one more time. But I was done. I started my first experience with mood altering at 7 years old. And my father was a police officer. And at 10 years old, I came home with a bicycle that didn't belong to me. And I told my father I found it. And he put me in jail and said, this is where you put people that find things that don't belong to them. And from that age until I was about 40 years old, I had a resentment against my father. The mean old police officer. I still don't like police officers all that much, to tell you the truth, because I'm always afraid they're going to find out something about me. And in my history of being clean, I've had to cross that bridge. I was about 8 years clean, I guess. And on my NA birthday, October 15th, I got a phone call at 4 o'clock in the morning. And the person on the phone said, this is Officer so-and-so of the Massachusetts State Police, and I have 4 warrants for your arrest. I said, yeah, who is this? It's my birthday. I figured it's one of the guys I sponsor, playing on the phone. He said, this is Officer so-and-so, and it sounded real. And I said, 4 warrants? He goes, yeah, 1970, you were stopped on a Massachusetts Turnpike with 4 handguns, narcotics, a stolen car, and resisting arrest, which are all felony offenses. And I remembered that occurrence. I remember that date. He said, you need to come into court and surrender, and we won't execute the warrants if you tell me when that'll happen. And I was in California then, living in California, and I said, I'll be there at Christmas and I'll take care of business. So first phone call I made was to my sponsor. I said, what do? He said, get a good lawyer. Some things we have to turn over to professional people. So I called a friend of my wife's who was an attorney in Massachusetts, and she found an attorney for me who had a 12-step fellowship background. And that Christmas, when I went back to Connecticut to celebrate the holidays with my family, I went to this courthouse and I asked, "How did you find me?" And they said, "Oh, we called your father and he told us where you were and that you're doing real good." And, them police stick together. And my father at that time was pretty proud of me, so he had no trouble telling this police officer where I was. And what had happened, they tore down the state police barracks. And when they did, this envelope was behind the locker. What's the chances of that happening? I guess the handguns kind of kept it, in a big bunch. So anyways, I went into the prosecutor's office, and my wife worked for Universal Studios then. And he said, "Who works for Universal?" And Karen said, "I do." He said, "Can you get me some baseball caps?" I mean, here I am worrying about going to prison for the next X amount of years, and this guy wants some baseball caps. And he explained to her that his son collected, ball caps and that he'd like to get some from Universal. So he said, "Listen, we don't have a beef with you. You're obviously not the same person. We're recommending to drop the case, but you have to plead because you never pleaded to these charges." So went in front of the judge, and I pleaded not guilty to all the charges. And the judge had some letters from my mother and my sponsor and some people I sponsored. And he said, "These letters are very impressive, and you like it in California?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Then go back to California." So, this program works in situations like that. And I know that if I was still using, I'd be locked up. But because my life had changed and I had become a productive member of this society, I caught a break. Just before that happened, I had gone back to Connecticut from California to be in one of my sponsees' weddings. And I went to my parents' house, and my mother said, "Were you expecting a letter?" I said, "No." She said, "Well, this came for you this week." And I opened up this letter, and it was a picture of a young lady, and the letter said, "You don't know me, but you're my father." And I met my daughter when she was 19 years old for the first time. That was 19 years ago. So I've known her as long as I didn't know her. And today we have a relationship. And I have a grandson who's just like his grandfather. And I can already see me bailing his ass out of jail someday. But we have a good relationship. And what I have found out from sponsoring people with children is that children of addicts are either addicts themselves or they're highly codependent. Example, my daughter's husband went to his first AA meeting when he was 16. But he's okay today. He just drinks near beer, so he's okay. But those are some of the things that happen to us in recovery. Some of them are joyful and some aren't so joyful. Some of the things we have to go through are pleasant and some aren't. I started talking about the people we've lost, and we've lost people at the World Service Office that I knew for a lot of years, people with 20 plus years clean. My sponsor, over 20 years, he sponsored me. When Bobby passed away, when he was sick, and before he passed away even, I started talking to another addict that had been part of my life and sponsored by Bobby as well. His name is Billy R. from Phoenix, Arizona. And he used to help me out because, you have a 20-plus year relationship with a sponsor. It's not always peaches and cream, There's going to be times where you disagree and your sponsor tells you things you don't like, and you got to deal with them, And Billy used to remind me that Bobby loved me, and he would get me through whatever kind of situation there was. So when Bobby got ill and I started talking to Billy, I knew who I was going to ask to help me. And I asked Billy to help me through Bobby's death because I knew it was going to be difficult. And he said, absolutely. And what I like about Billy is he always says that I can't stop you from going through the gates of hell, but I can hold your hand and we'll go through together, And that's what we can offer to other addicts. We can't stop the pain that they're going through, but we can hold their hand and walk through it with them. It kind of lightens the load. So when Bobby passed away, I asked Billy to sponsor me. And Billy is a wonderful, wonderful man, a wonderful sponsor. Since I found out about this liver cancer, I've talked to him every day, and he reassures me that it's going to be okay no matter what happens, that he's there for me. And I think that's important to us as addicts because we suffer so severely from inadequacy and unworthiness. We always think that we're less than, no matter how long we've been clean, or no matter what we do in our lives, we always feel less than everybody else. It's the nature of our disease. Grandiosity on one side and unworthiness on the other. We can never find the right medium in between that. So Billy's been a wonderful sponsor. He called me tonight and said, kick him in the butt tonight, do your thing. And that he was proud of me. He always says that. And it means a lot to me. And I say the same things to the guys I sponsor, that each time they celebrate a happy occasion, an anniversary, birth of a child, I'm proud of them. Speaking of a birth of a child, I got a sponsee, John, in California. His wife just had a baby that weighs 1.5 pounds, and the baby's still alive, and it's made it almost through the first month. And that's a miracle. And what I do is I tell the other guys I sponsor, and there's a power in prayer, Last year when I was laying in intensive care with a busted up face, near dead, people prayed for me, and a loving God helped me through that power of prayer. See, I don't know if that really works or not, but I always, think like Dutch taught me a long time ago. Dutch used to say, it's better to believe, and when you pass on, if there's nothing there, you really haven't lost anything. But if you don't believe and you pass on and there's something there, you're screwed. See, you kind of got to hedge your bet a little bit, You kind of got to hedge your bet and say, well, just in case there's something, how addicts are, just in case, I think I'll try this, even if I don't tell anybody. What W.C. Fields say when he was reading the Bible near death was he was looking for loopholes, So we got to look for loopholes and, try to get to the other side conveniently. When I asked Bobby to sponsor me, it was in 1986 or 1985, I forget. He asked me where I was at with the steps. And I started to expound how much I knew about the steps, and he told me to shut up. I was only digging the hole deeper. And my experience in the steps is, I don't use that workbook that Narcotics Anonymous has. Number one is I don't want to sit there and listen to somebody answer the same question 100 different ways. If I ask you the question, one answer is enough for me, And so I'm a little bit old-fashioned. I just talk about what the first step means to me. And what it means to me is I have a disease called addiction. And I'm powerless over that disease that's trying to kill me. My disease tries to kill me 24/7. And I'm powerless over that. And the dichotomy of all of that is I try to control things. Substitution. I substitute things. I have this thing called denial where I don't want to see things as they really are. I want to see them like I want them to be. And it's all that control that I exhibit that makes my life unmanageable. So when I get there, I say, well, what can I do if I'm powerless over something and I can't control it? I guess I got to turn to a loving God in step 2. And I've got to come to believe there is a power greater than myself that can restore me to sanity. And I think for most addicts, when we look at the 12 steps, that word sanity sticks out right away because we all think we're insane. For me, when I wrote about insanity, it was all about the fear that I had that I could never talk about. I was afraid of things my whole life. I was afraid of crying. I was afraid of the dark. I was afraid of the boogeyman, I was afraid of a lot of things that I couldn't talk about because I was brought up to be tough. And when my father put me in jail when I was 10, I never cried after that. I didn't cry until I got clean. So that insanity to me was all that fear that had to be dealt with. Yeah, I thought the insanity was the stick-ups, the robberies, the unknown people that suffered at my hand. That's what I thought the insanity was, and it's not about that at all. And how do I let this God work for me? I take a third step, which I don't take once a day. I get on my knees every morning now, like I did the first day I got clean. And I ask God, I tell God, thank you for keeping me clean and letting me wake up today. That's a big plus. I ask God to help me help another addict today, help another human being today. My prayers are not real long and difficult and certainly not religious in any kind of way. I talk to my higher power, and I come to believe that that power is going to take care of me if I'm willing and able to turn my will and my life over to that power and don't take it back. Because generally, once I get off my knees, I start wondering how I can help. I'm a helpful person, so, God might want a little of my help today, That don't work. I sometimes, in the course of a day, might ask God to help me 100 or 200 times. Maybe more, maybe less. I don't know. I just know when things happen to me during the course of a day, whether it be on the job or giving direction to a sponsee or getting ready to share at a meeting, I ask God to help me. Let me carry a message, not a mess. I carried a mess my whole life. I made a mess every place I went. People used to say, boy, I'm glad he's gone. No one ever said, come back. When I got clean, I was on a methadone program at 120 milligrams a day. And I was asleep most of the time. And when I came into this program and I went to my first meeting and I heard him say, we're going to have a prayer to close the meeting, I got the hell out of there. Because if you think the way I thought, must be a religious movement, they're going to have me at the airport with a tambourine collecting money for them. I ain't doing that, So it took me a couple of months to get that out of my system. People would, what's your name? My name's Chuck. I used to drive home. I used to look in the mirror, make sure nobody was following me. Didn't want anybody to know where I lived. But when I got that urge, like we all do, and I thought I had something to say one night, I raised my hand and I said I was an addict. My name was Bob. And I expounded about the topic. And they said, keep coming back. And I said, gee, they like what I got to say. I might be able to help these people. They might make me president someday. Now I know why they said keep coming back. Narcotics Anonymous was fun in the beginning because if you were new, they tell you sit in front and shut up. You do that today, they get a lawyer and they sue you, You can't tell anybody anything, You can't talk to me that way, whatever. When I first tried to attempt the fourth step, I was fairly new in recovery. And the guy gave me this list of all kinds of stuff that included bestiality and all kinds of crap. And I wrote some answers to these questions and I said, what do I do with it? This was before Bobby sponsored me. And he said, oh, we're going to go on this retreat to this monastery and you read it to one of the people there. So, I'm willing. I did that, lied my ass off, told this person what I wanted him to hear. Felt really no relief. So I shared that with Bobby and I said, I've done this before. And he said, what'd you do? And I told him and he laughed and he said, no, he says, I want you to write about three things. I want you to write about resentments. I want you to write about relationships. And I want you to write about secrets. And it sounded easy to me. And then he said, and you'll have it done in 6 weeks because that's when I'll be back in Connecticut. And I was willing, and I wrote every night, and in 6 weeks I was done. And I remember sitting and doing that fifth step with my sponsor. And I believe to this day the strongest bond that takes place between a sponsor and a sponsee is in that fifth step. And I told this man everything I could think of related to my life up to that point. Everything I could remember, I wrote about. Every situation, every resentment, every relationship, and every secret. I wrote about. And when I shared it with him, we cried, we laughed, and we got through it. And I felt the best I'd ever felt in my life. That a big rock had been like taken off my back. I didn't know what was going to come next. It really didn't matter at that point. But after I took that inventory and I destroyed it, threw it away, we sat down and he said, I want you to make a list of the defects of character. And I think I had 11, maybe 12. And he said, what about this? What about this? What about this? And then I had like 70. The women have more. So, guys, you're lucky. The women have more because they're supposed to. Or we have less because we're supposed to, I guess. But, defects of character in the sixth step talks about becoming entirely ready to have God remove these defects. Well, we need to know what we're asking him to remove. Now, I had a landlady that was in the other fellowship, and I said, what do you folks do about defects? Oh, we ask God to remove them and they go away. I hate to give you the bad news. It don't work that way. Because the only place defects go is to the back of the line so they can come back up again. Okay? They find their little niche, and then when you need it, you got it. But I wrote about these defects and how they affected my life. And I used to think I knew everything. Bobby would say things to me and I would say, I know. One time he looked at me and said, why don't you write how come you know every goddamn thing? And I found out how little I knew. But I wrote about these defects and how they affected my life. And how my life would be without them was very, very similar. I'd have greater freedom. I'd be a nicer person. I would treat people the way I want to be treated. I would get into the reality of things, that I'm not perfect and neither is anybody else. And I need to accept myself and others as we are, not the way I want them to be. What a miracle that is. To be able to have the insight to know that we have all these problems in living, but yet we're living clean. And it gave me a different perspective on going to meetings and listening to other addicts and allowing them to share what they need to share and not be so critical. It's hard for me today. I'm a very critical person. I sit there and take people's inventory. Sometimes I don't speak at a meeting because I'm busy, thinking stuff about people and what they talk about. In step 7, we humbly ask God to remove the shortcoming, the way we act out on those defects that we wrote about in step 6. So you can't do a good step 7 if you haven't done a good step 6, in my opinion. And please know that these are my opinions and, it's not for debate after this talk is over with. Don't piss me off. The hardest part about going through the steps was when I got to step 8 and I was asked to make a list of people I had harmed, and I couldn't do it. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, what about people that owe me amends? I'd like to cash in a little bit of money from the people that owe me. I'd like people to tell me they're sorry for the way they treated me. Because as an addict, isn't it always about me? Isn't it always about what I've got coming? And I remember when I was trying to start working step 8 and Sydney said, you really want to know what you got coming? Do you really want to get what you deserve? And I had to think about that. See, I wanted forgiveness is what I wanted. My 3 steps in the beginning was I'm an addict, I'm sorry, and how can I help you? That's a 3-step, not 1, 2, and 3. That's the way I saw it. I didn't find out about forgiveness until I was able to start writing that 8-step list. And I had to forgive myself. But I didn't put myself on the list because I knew if I did, I would get it all. And I had to write about the people in my life, family members, institutions, people with no names that I had robbed or I had hurt emotionally or physically, especially financially. I was a pretty good paper hanger at one time till I got caught. You're only guilty until, if you get caught. Or so I thought. So in step 8, I wrote about all these situations and all these people, and I was willing to make amends. And then I started chipping away at the ones that were immediate. And my mother and father were the first ones that I went to tell them that I'd like to make things right. And I was sitting in their kitchen. I said, could you put a dollar figure on what I owe you so I can start paying you back? And my father started laughing and said, you won't live long enough. And my mother started crying and she said, we don't want no money. So I told Bobby, I said, they don't want nothing. I said, I like her answer a lot better than his, you know. He said, you know, your parents are blue collar and you need to do something nice for them so that you feel as though, you've treated them with the respect they deserve. And I remember buying my parents a VCR, and my mother still has it hooked up in her living room. If it was a stereo, it would probably be 8-track by now, but I gave them this VCR, and it made me feel good. It made me feel like things were right. And I've been able to do things, for my mother. My father's passed on. We made things right between us. He used to kiss me, tell me he loved me. Never did that growing up because I grew up in a very strict Catholic French family where you don't tell your children you love them. It's like incestual or something, But after I made my amends with them, my father used to kiss me whenever he saw me, and he told me he loved me, and I told him I loved him. And I made a couple trips to the hospital at the end of his life and held his hand and told him how much I loved him and I appreciate everything he did for me. And that's what we do. When you think of somebody or you see somebody and you love them, tell them. And if you don't see them, call them and tell them because it might be the last time. And especially last year when I had that auto accident, I didn't know if I'd see anybody again. And I tell everybody I sponsor that I love them. I tell addicts that I love them even if I don't like them. I don't have to like everybody, but I should love everybody. And I should reach out to them because you never know what goes on inside another human being's heart. They may be hurting too, but you can't treat them, less than. You have to treat them with respect and love. And I believe that the more we love other people, the more we love ourselves. Our personal recovery depends on unity. The first tradition tells us that. And so I try to, explain to the guys I sponsor that even if you don't like somebody, you hug them when they speak, you hug them when you see them. I want to share with you real quick. I was living in Los Angeles, California. I enjoyed it. And I got a job offer in Florida. And I went to Florida to work for one of my grandbabies. And after I got there, he didn't feel I was worth being an employee any longer. And we parted ways. And I felt the way we parted ways that he had done me wrong. And I discounted him for a couple of years. If he was in the same room, I wouldn't even acknowledge he was there. It's like, I'll show you. It's like that person, I'll show you. I'm going to go get high. You only hurt yourself, And at a meeting a few months ago, I was face to face with him and I gave him a hug. And it made a world of difference in my recovery. I don't know if it affected his or not, but it made me feel like I did the right thing. And I say that because many, many times we have differences amongst us, especially if you get involved in any kind of service like area service or regional service or convention committees, and people don't do what you think they should do. You get pissed off at them and you don't want to talk to them. You start talking bad about them. You're only hurting yourself because you deny yourself a chance to know that human being on a different level. You're taking somebody out of your life that may be able to help you someday. So I try to do that. Now, when I was making my amends, and I talked about my folks, my brother's a year older than me. And back when I was using, they didn't have picture IDs. So unfortunately, my brother got arrested a lot because I knew his name, his social security, where he lived, his phone number. And they took my picture and put it was his information. And so when he didn't show up at court, they'd go get him. And he was married and had children, and he was pissed. I would say, let me borrow your car for an hour, and I'd go cop, and I'd be gone 3 days, and I'd come back with 5 bullet holes in the back of his car, and sorry, and I was sorry a lot for the things that I did. And my sponsor said, you love your brother? And I said, yes. He said, go tell him. Now, that sounds real simple. But when I went to my brother's house that night and I looked at him, man, I got choked up. Those words were hard to come out. I went in the bathroom, got on my knees, and I asked God to help me. And I walked out and I said, Dave, I love you. He said, I know. I said, oh, he's forgiven me. This is great. 10 years later, he came to Los Angeles on a business trip. And we went out to dinner. And over dinner, he looked at me and said, okay, I forgive you. 10 years, God gave me the opportunity to have the brother that I wanted, and he was still pissed off. But he forgave me, and we have a relationship today. My brother's not the warm and cuddly person that you'd probably like for a brother, but we have a good relationship. When he finds out that I'm not doing well physically or whatever, calls and, tells me he wishes me the best, a lot better than it used to be, I remember him throwing me out of his house, telling him if I showed up in his house again, he'd have me arrested, Now, my sister's got a great sense of humor. I went to my sister and I said, that vacuum cleaner you got for your wedding and it was still in a box and it went out the back door when I left? I'd like to buy you another vacuum cleaner. And she said, I don't need one, but you can come and vacuum my house every week. That would work for me, So be careful what you offer. There's been a lot of joy in some of the things that I've had the opportunity to make amends for. When I was gainfully employed and fairly well compensated, I was able to put all new windows in my mother's house and a roof on her house and help her out that way. And not telling her why, I just did it, but that's part of my amends. Some of the things I did in my act of addiction is let me get a pack of cigarettes, and when the clerk turned around, I'd grab the canister for Cancer Society or something, and I'd take it with me when I left. So now, we get solicitors call and they want $15 for the Seeing Eye Society or Children's Smiling Faces movement or cancer. I say, okay, send me an invoice and I'll give you the money. And I do that not because I'm a generous old soul. I do it because I have amends that I'll never be able to make. Because I don't know how much money I ever stole from those canisters. I just know that I owe. And I'm willing to do that as long as I can. That's my part in my recovery process. And that's what I do. And I share that because some of you may wonder what you can do in similar situations, and that's my experience. When it comes to step 10, in the beginning, I thought that was something at the end of the day you sat down and you took living the program and you went through quick and you checked everything off, the same as what you did yesterday. And okay, did my 10 step. And it was like that for a while for me. But it's not like that anymore. I have to continuously take my inventory. Everybody else takes it. Well, I might as well take it too, put my spin on it anyways. But I look at what I do during the day, and if I do something wrong, I try to admit it. I try to act as if sometimes. Situation that happened at work where someone tried to take my job or discount me out of the organization. And instead of my old way of I'll get even, I treat her the same way I've always treated her. I say good morning, I smile, ask her how her tennis game is. I'm not saying I'm perfect. Under my breath, I probably say a few other things, but I give the appearance that this is, okay. I don't treat her any different. And I think that's part of our 10th step. Because if I say anything or do anything, I'm going to have to make it right sometime. And I don't want to have to do that. Step 11 always seemed so esoterical to me because it reminded me of magic carpet rides, with all this meditation and sitar music and purple Osley and all this other stuff. Step 11 I try to simplify things if you haven't been able to tell that already. Through prayer and meditation, I improve, make better my contact with my loving God. And the power to carry it out means get the courage to do the right thing. Get the courage to tell somebody who steals a seventh tradition, that's not okay. To tell somebody who cross-talks in a meeting, that's not okay. It doesn't make you popular. It's just the ability to express yourself to another person on what you believe recovery should be about. And I don't do it all the time. A lot of times I tell somebody else they shouldn't do that instead of going to that person and telling them. But I try to have the courage to do the right thing. Because we all know we have that thing inside of us when we get to that fork, left or right. If we go left and we get that voice, shouldn't do that, but we do it anyway, we pay the price. You know, people say you can do anything you want here if you're willing to pay the price. I'm not willing to pay the price of going out and using. But using is not just drugs. I want to be clear about that because in the beginning, I thought it was all about using drugs. Using is behavior modification. The way we behave, the way we treat people, the way we act, the things that we do, spending money that we don't have, getting ourselves in jackpots that if we had done something different, we wouldn't have gotten there, And this is not something that I don't see anybody doing perfectly, but we know what the right thing to do is, and we should try to do the right thing. Because when we get to step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of working the 12 steps. Now, some newcomers get spiritual awakenings by going to Starbucks and getting a triple-double. And I understand that too. I've had a few of those myself, especially in the beginning, where you start drinking coffee at a meeting at 7 or 7:30 in the evening, and at 6 o'clock in the morning, you're still talking. But you ain't done no drugs, but you drank a gallon of coffee, In the beginning, I told this guy, I said, I have a hard time sleeping at night. He said, you drink coffee at meetings? I said, yeah. He said, don't drink any coffee. You'll probably go to sleep at night. Smart man. It works. But having had a spiritual awakening as a result of the 12 steps, our message to newcomers and to other addicts is the 12 steps. See, in any given situation, we're only 12 steps away from a solution. We'll try every other goddamn thing we can to find another way to do it. But it's only 12 steps. I don't want to take any more time. I'm probably getting people's butts sore. I used to ask my sponsor, how long should I speak? He said, how long can you sit? But I'm really glad to be here. I thank you for listening. And like I've been ending my talk with the last 2 times, if you're headed in the right direction, just keep on walking. Thank you very much.